Hello. In this video we've got the T25 power steering conversion from Corsa B or C, as you can see from the motor here. Now I've decided to remove this unit because all of the steering is over 40 years old. I'm going to give it an overhaul and a check anyway. To make matters easy for anybody who's attempting to do it after me, I'll go through the removal one by one. First of all, you pull off this cap, it unclips. See the clips there. Slowly pulled it away with my hand because that's quite brittle plastic because of the age, which reveals the inside of the steering wheel. You then have a 24mm nut. Those can be extremely tight. If you've got two people, it's best to have two people, one to hold onto the steering wheel and the other to turn with a long bar, because sometimes if you just leave it on the steering lock and turn it, it will twist the whole lot. But they generally don't come off too badly. Once the nut's off, sit yourself behind the steering wheel, hold it and rock it backwards and forwards like that, pulling it towards you. It should go. If they don't go, 99 times out of 100 they do. You can use a rubber mallet on the back, but be careful. I mean, these smaller ones on anything smaller than 16-ton lorry, I haven't ever had a problem with. Now once that's off, you're left with the indicator stalk here. Now obviously remove the two, or is it three there, the connectors, and you're then left with three screws. 1, 2, 3. Unscrew those, and for the purpose of this one, because it's quite old, I put some tape around it just to hold it back together. You're then left with this unit. Now I unplugged this, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that's completely removed. You can take the motor out to make it easier if it's going to make it a bit lighter for you. And then this universal joint near here, I just removed the top one, which has got that Torx head on it, which makes me suspicious that this is a Vauxhall part and not a Volkswagen part. Once that is removed, this springs open very slightly. It's not too bad. You then remove the two top bolts, 13mm at the top, and then the two 13s at the bottom. If there's nobody with you, you can hold it up with a ratchet strap or rope or something like that. You don't want it dropping down. Once that has dropped down and that bolt's out, literally wiggle, 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 and it should come off. If you've got a real problem, you can wedge that, but on that end I wouldn't recommend it. And then the unit's out. However, we're going a little bit further, and I would thoroughly recommend this because the vehicle's over 40 years old. We've taken this universal joint out as well. Having worked on lorries, big and small, all my life, I've had problems with these before. When they become lumpy in their movement, sometimes that transfers through the steering. The steering goes heavy and light, light and heavy. The universal joint should have a lovely, smooth movement all the way around, and no play, no rocking from side to side. This end is fine. This hand, however, as it goes onto the rack, is really lumpy and horrible, and I can see bits and pieces in there falling out. Dangerous. I would recommend checking that. The difficulty was getting this to come out. Once the nut and bolt is out, you're going to need something to wedge in there. That hole is fairly small. So an absolutely smaller coal chisel to hammer into that gap, to spread that open, and then a light tap and it came off. I don't know whether we'll be able to rebuild this by buying a new universal joint or have to buy a new unit. Either way, I don't care what I buy. I'm really glad I discovered that, because that is not good. Next, we go on to the steering. well, this is how it works. You've got an ECU, electronic control unit, which powers into here. You've got this steering sensor here. This goes onto the column. If you turn to the right, the sensor in here will move slightly, and I do mean slightly, and it will sense that you've moved to the right, and it will power the motor in one direction. If you move to the left, it will reverse the polarity and power the motor in the other direction, assisting you. However, it's not as simple as that. At this end here, we've got the power in and this sensor here. Problem with power steering is, that's great having full power steering and having full power when you're parked. You don't want it full power when you're driving down the motorway at 70, 60 or 50, probably 50 in that. So this unit here plugs into there, and then that then branches off to a unit that goes around the speedo cable, obviously sensing the speedo and cutting down the power to the motor as your speed goes up. We've got problems with this one. Main problem is it don't work at all. So I've got an electronics friend who's looking at all the other bits and pieces for me. He's going to sort all of that out and make sure that everything is good. We're going to strip this unit down, look at it from my side, which is the mechanical side, and make sure all the bearings and everything in this are good. Because you've got one bearing inside here, one bearing inside here, and you've got another bearing that runs through the side, because this is almost like a rack and pinion system through here, and a nylon gear. So without further ado, we'll get that in the bench and we'll strip that. Well, we're taking the steering column out for a number of reasons. Firstly, we want to get to the wiring at the back to go through all of that. Secondly, because it was hanging out anyway, just a case of disconnecting that thing at the bottom there. And thirdly, just to check on the inside, because there's a plastic wheel in here and we're not sure of the condition of those. Apparently there's a very common fault. The thing I have noticed is as you turn the steering here, it feels slightly notchy, and there are two bearings in there. So we're going to attempt to whip this apart now and check those bearings to make sure that they're in good condition. Well, that's a bit difficult. 27mm nuts locked together, but they're very, very thin. So getting a normal spanner on there will cross between the two. So realistically, you're going to need a very thin 27mm spanner or something along those lines to release that. With the two lock nuts off and these three 10mm bolts out from here, it's just simply a case of pulling this off. It's got a nice rubber seal in there. As you can see from that, this is the blue nylon gear for the steering. And really, really common apparently for these to fail. Our one looks okay. However, upon the removal of this shaft, because I thought that these nuts were a little bit tight for my liking, and having done the research, I'm correct. That doesn't always happen. This bearing here, lovely, got plenty of movement in it, but this base bearing here is really notchy and noisy, this one at the base. Now you can buy these bearings, but fortunately for me, I've got a couple of these spare, so these whole units, so I'll check those, make sure they're okay, and then we should be good to reassemble. Well, here's our original part here, and here's our donor part here. The only difference being that if you're fitting it to the VW T25, there's an adaptation been made where this base lug here has been cut off and this upper lug here has been cut away. This unit we've measured with a vernier caliper, check the part number and this, that and the rest of it. This should be absolutely spot on, and the bearings are lovely in that, so I'm very lucky. All ready to go back on. Because of the 3 offsets here, you can't get it wrong, he says. O-ring's nice. Yeah, lovely. Okay, all back together. I think you can see across here where this has been welded, this is the adaptive bracket made to take it from the Corsa to the VW T25. I've had a good look around that, and whoever welded that very well, so I don't need to touch that. My problem now is how to lock these 2 thin nuts. So we're now going to look for a solution to that. Once that's done, we're ready to go back in. The last thing, but we're not going to assemble it, we're going to wait till it's inside the vehicle, is the steering sensor inside this hole. Alright, now I don't know if you can see that, but this section here has got a cutout on it, and this is where your steering sensor goes. And it moves this wheel, but it moves it so minutely you wouldn't believe. So as you turn this steering, this column moves up very slightly, I think only 1 mil or 2 mil. So this adjustment on this has to be spot on, and I will leave that to an expert, because if they're going to come down with a meter and this, that and the rest of it, but I will endeavour to show you how that's done. Just a note for you, before reassembly we've had a good look here, and we've noticed that this has been rubbing on this and has worn quite a section of this hard pipe, brake pipe I would assume, away. So we are most definitely going to have to do something about that. Steering column checked, polished, a little bit of paint never does any harm. Everything good. We noticed that the angle of it was slightly wrong, so we made a metal packer there to try and keep this in a straight line. We do know that this universal joint is no good, so I've ordered the parts, but because I've got the auto electrician coming tomorrow morning, we'll keep it assembled for now, and hopefully tomorrow we can get the whole thing working. Get some well, the electrical side of the steering is all back in now and working, and I can share with you what I've learned. Out of the electrical components from the frame I showed you earlier, obviously we've got the motor. Now the motor has been tested to check it's drawing the correct amount of amps. I think it's around 30 amps. And I've got a couple of these motors because I've got a spare unit, but both motors are drawing exactly the right current. So the motor's good. The next issue is this. the electronic control module. Now, this is one I got off a friend of mine. The original one that was on the vehicle, we opened it up from these tabs at the back and it's all burnt inside. So that's obviously causing a problem. I have read that these are a problem sometimes, but they seem readily available on eBay. However, you know, you pays your money and you takes your chance. You can get these overhauled, but it does look like quite an expensive option. This is also not something you can test yourself without the right equipment, and the guy I know has taken this away and tested it. Connected to that is this unit, speed sensor. Now, there are a number of options. You either have one that goes around the speedo cable and senses the speed that you're doing and reduces the speed thereafter. You can have one of these with an adjustable button, or a simple switch which cuts it down to half power or full power depending on what speed you're doing. I've wired one in that's just a simple switch, and I'm more than happy with that. That's that. The most critical problem that we've had is this steering position sensor. Now, the steering position sensor that goes under the column there, the position of it, the fractions that you have to turn it to get it dead right are absolutely minute. I'm talking about a fraction of a millimetre. So these are generally factory set when they come out of the factory. So don't mess with it unless you have to. The one that we had when we took it apart was bent and it wasn't sticking inside the column properly, so we had no choice but to take it out. It's been set up with a special electric meter where you turn it and then they find the absolute 0 point where the steering's at the centre and then calibrate it from there. You can calibrate it yourself by just putting it in, but bear in mind when you switch the ignition on, you hear the ignition click and you hear a click from this box. If that clicks again, that means that it has cut off the power to the box because it senses that there's something wrong. So if you've got the position sensor wrong, it will cut it off. It only has to be slightly out. So you can do it by hand, but you'd have to be switching the ignition on and off all the time to get it dead right. A little bit troublesome. If I had to do it, I'm sure I could do it, but it would take a long time. As I say, all checked over, in and working. Absolutely delighted with that. If anybody's got any questions, let me know. Apart from that, we're ready to bolt up and put it together.